So the previous video on Eve explained that there was a time gap between Adam's creation and the creation of Eve. Now there was a view held by Jehovah's Witnesses and mentioned in their Watchtower magazine in 1968 in August, and this is what it said, and this is why 7 years later the Jehovah's Witnesses recognised that 1975, if the 6,000 years is correct, there had to be a gap between the end of that period of time because of Eve's creation, knowing that the seventh day could only start after the creation of Eve. And of course the Bible doesn't provide how long it was, but this is what they said, and this is why they thought that perhaps this event called Armageddon would happen very quickly after 1975, autumn thereof. This is what it says. The time between Adam's creation and the beginning of the seventh day of rest, let it be noted, need not have been a long time. They're hoping. It could have been a rather short time. The naming of the animals by Adam and his discovery that there was no one for himself required no great length of time, really. The animals were in subjection to Adam. They were peaceful. They came to Adam and he named them. Eve's creation could have been quickly accomplished while Adam was sleeping. They infer that Adam went to sleep one night. God took out the rib, made the woman overnight, and then the next day Adam accepted her, and that would then be the beginning of the Sabbath day, the seventh day, the end of the sixth day. And of course other creationists, they actually take each day literally, saying, oh well, God clipped his fingers, cling, and animals appeared, and a man, you know. But, as I've said in other videos, now let's look at another account, because obviously I hold a different view, because it's a long time ago, 1975, and if it was correct, the gap between Adam and his wife's creation must have been nearly 50 years. So let's have a look. So this is a book called, this is a reference from a book that will be in the subtitles. It's talking about Adam and Eve and their creation. It was the sixth creative day, and so God was not violating a Sabbath arrangement by continuing to work at further earthly creation, i.e. the creation of Eve. How then did he create a helper for Adam as a complement of him? Thousands of years before modern science and the discovery for a painless operation, it says God put a deep sleep on the man, and while he was sleeping he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh over it and built the rib into a woman. Now Adam recognised this because he said, this is the last bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman. Now, what does that exactly mean? So, Adam had been told how the first woman had been built up from one of his ribs, with blood-building properties in its marrow. He could correctly call her bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh. He had all the more reason to feel that she was part of him because his own body had contributed towards her creation by God. Precisely right, it could be said. The Apostle Paul said that God made out of one man every nation of men to dwell on the entire surface of the earth. We're one family. The unity between Adam and Eve. So the sexual union of being one flesh, Adam and his wife were one flesh before they had any kind of sexual union. So his union between himself and his wife that he accepted was a much stronger bond. Of course, he sets the rules that a man will leave his family, mother and father, and he will find a wife, and they'll go off and set up their new household. And that would cause the population to increase across the world. God revealed his purpose to humankind and the earth. He purposed that this earth should be filled with the offspring of the first man and first woman. Not only this, but that all the earth that this human family could occupy should be subdued. subdued to what condition? To the condition of the paradise in which they found themselves at first. This meant the whole earth should be beautified and made livable by extending the boundaries of paradise planted by God till east meets west and north meets south, all continents. There was to be no overcrowding of the paradise, but human reproduction was to continue until all the subdued earth was comfortably filled. Rather like you have a cup of tea or coffee and you say, fill me up a cup of tea. It's filled, isn't it? They were not to kill off lower animal creatures. They were to have them in subjection under loving control. In fact, at that time, they were vegetarians. There was no meat eating. That only happened after the flood. So, just in summary, to grasp this, we need not lose the sight. Otherwise, we could fall into religious confusion and error. Man's existence on earth was not accidental and was not meant to be aimless. God deliberately put man and woman on earth for a purpose. This purpose was disclosed to the first human parents. They were informed to fill the earth and fill it with righteous offspring that would be like themselves, obedient and caring for the planet. And that's the subject of people's minds today. And many wonder, well, how could the population grow so large? But remember that Adam and Eve lived hundreds of years. So Eve could have had 50 children, and then her children, her daughters, likely to be half the population of the babies, they could have 50 as well. So imagine the population growth in 1,650 years. They reckon that there were hundreds of millions of people potentially on earth when Almighty God brought the flood. So, in summary, Eve was critically important, and it means that the division between man and woman, because woman actually was not made separate from man, she's actually part of man's flesh. That means that all this division between men and women, it's in the minds, it's in society, it's not in reality, biologically. And another comment said that God is, of course, the creator of sex, because it didn't exist before. It was provided with animals on earth and creatures. They were able to reproduce, but there's no record of sex other than here on planet Earth. And that means that sex, the purpose of sex was reproduction, as it is with the animals and the creatures and the insects. That was its purpose with humans. And when reproduction would need to stop as the earth got filled, then sex would also stop, because that was the purpose of sex. So sex is misused today, a kind of for pleasure, but it has caused a lot of problems. So that's why Eve and Adam are really considered completely equal in the sight of God. So that sums that up. And that sums up that Jehovah's Witnesses, when they were waiting for 1975, were hoping that it'd be really quick. But actually, when you look at what had to happen with Adam, he had to get established. He had to build a relationship with God, which would likely have taken 20 or 30 years. And then he had to have a deep sleep, and God would have had to... So time would have elapsed. We know that nearly 50 years elapsed already. We will only know how long the gap is between Adam and Eve and him going into an anaesthetic, which could have been for 10 or 20 years while they were creating a body from Adam's flesh. So that is to be found out in the future when Jesus brings Armageddon. So thank you for everybody. References will be in the subtitles and in the description on this video. Thank you very much.